Risk of Rain 2 is an amazing 3D roguelike. There are 13 survivors to play as, which all function differently and have unique strengths and weaknesses. For instance, Rex has highly damaging abilities, but he damages himself when he uses them. So the more healing you have, the more damage you can pump out. But you are putting yourself at risk of being one-shot because there is a gap between using the ability and getting the healing. Another example is Loader. She has some of the most fun and satisfying movement abilities in any game I have ever played. Her grapple allows you to fling yourself at super high speeds across the map, and if you time your gauntlet ability just right, you can gain even more speed and redirect yourself so you're moving at an enemy. Her gauntlet also does more damage the faster she is moving, so mastering this mechanic feels incredibly rewarding. By performing various challenges, new survivors, alternative abilities, and new items can be unlocked, which can be used in future runs. A core feature of the game is the scaling difficulty. As time goes on, the difficulty increases, resulting in more difficult enemies, more of those enemies, along with enemies having higher health and damage. This encourages you to move quickly and not waste time, which feels great. To progress, you must find the teleporter on each stage and activate it. Doing so triggers a boss to spawn, along with waves of enemies until the teleporter reaches 100% charge. There are multiple alternative maps for each stage, which provides a lot of variety in the environments you traverse. As you kill enemies on a given stage, you will earn money, which can be used to purchase chests, which will reward you with a random item. The items are what make Risk of Rain, Risk of Rain. There are various tiers of items: white, which are basic items, green, which are slightly rarer and generally more useful, and red, which if you get the right one, can define your run. There are also yellow items which occasionally drop from bosses during the teleporter events, and blues which can only be purchased from lunar pods and at the bazaar. Blue items also have drawbacks to them, so you won't always want to pick them up. Purple items are void items, which come from the DLC. They are alternative versions of pre-existing items with slightly altered effects. If you have any of the regular item the void item is based on, they will be converted to that void item when you pick it up. The void items are too strong in my opinion. Getting a couple decent ones makes the run so much easier. Finally, there are orange equipments which provide active effects on a cooldown. All the items in the game can fit into the categories of damage, defense, mobility, and investment. Damage items typically give the chance for an effect to occur on hit or a flat damage increase under certain conditions. Defensive items give you armor, reducing your damage taken, or give you various methods of healing. Mobility items increase your sprinting speed or give you a double jump. Investment items make it easier for you to acquire new items. Every item in the game can be powerful under the right conditions, and picking up items is incredibly exciting, as you are always hoping for the right item to show up that will fill a gap in your build or increase your damage exponentially. Items can also be turned into scrap and used at a 3D printer to create more copies of the item shown at the printer. And if you don't have any scrap, a random item of that tier will be used to create the item at the printer. Getting more than one of an item creates a stack of that item, increasing its effect in some way. Some items have their damage increased, some their chance to proc, others their range, and many increase in more than one way. When you're learning the game, it can be really frustrating that you can't see what stacking an item does when you're in-game, as you can be unsure if it is worth it to get more of a particular item. You can see what stacking an item does in the logbook outside of the game, but even that is not reliable. For example, Tougher Times does not have a 15% increase in proc chance per stack. It scales hyperbolically, meaning each consecutive Tougher Times gives a smaller chance than the previous. So if you have 3 Tougher Times, you actually have a 31% chance to block damage, as opposed to a 45 according to the logbook. A few items also have no explanation of what they actually do, and instead have flavor text, which I really think is absurd. You can argue you are meant to experiment and figure out what the items do, but I really dislike this method of obscuring information from the player. There are so many items that even after dozens of hours it can be difficult to keep them all straight in your head. It'd be much nicer to just be able to read a sentence in-game and refresh your memory. Another thing that adds to the confusion about items are proc coefficients. Proc coefficients are the rate at which an effect is applied. For example, if an item has a 10% chance of occurring, but your attack has a 0.7 proc coefficient, it actually has a 7% chance of occurring. So, if you're playing a character with a proc coefficient of less than 1, and you stack 10 tri-tip daggers, even though the text says it gives you a 10% chance to inflict bleed, you will need more than 10 to achieve max bleed. But it is made even more confusing by critical strike chance not factoring in proc coefficients. I think the system actually works quite well, as it allows for slower abilities to have a higher chance of triggering effects, and rapid abilities a lower chance. However, This system is confusing as fuck for a newcomer to the game. There probably should have been some kind of explanation of how proc coefficients work somewhere in the game. There are multiple possible win conditions in the game, the first being simply reaching the final boss, Mithrix, and defeating him on stage 6. Alternatively, you can decide to loop the run on stage 5 and return to the first stage. When looping, new hazards and enemies will be present, making it more difficult. After reaching the third stage again, a portal will appear, which will give you the opportunity to obliterate at the obelisk. Finally, added in the DLC, you can take the purple portal and defeat the Voidling. You can also choose to keep looping your run as many times as you like, so runs can technically be infinite. If you decide to loop your runs frequently, and on a few different survivors, you will find that every character plays almost the same past stage 7 or 8, assuming you have gotten some decent items. This is because of the importance of proc chains. What ends up happening is you fire a single attack, and that attack triggers an effect, but that effect has a proc coefficient of its own, and that will trigger an effect, and that will go on until your entire screen is wiped of enemies. This can feel really cool the first couple of times it happens, as you feel incredibly powerful, and it can be really satisfying to watch happen. But after the novelty wears off, it makes every looped run feel exactly the same. This could be helped by reducing the number of items with on-hit effects and reducing the proc coefficients of those items. Of course, if you did this, you would need to reduce the health of enemies late game to keep things balanced. But I think that would be a net positive for the game, as you would still feel like you're playing the survivor you picked, instead of playing the items you have. There are a ton of different options on how you play the game, between different difficulty modes and artifacts that can be unlocked which alter how the game works. This allows for a lot of room to create challenge runs for yourself if that interests you. One of my biggest gripes with the DLC is how obnoxious the Void Seeds are. Void Seeds are these huge purple areas that damage you when you're inside them. They can only be removed by killing all of the Void enemies inside or around them, but some of the enemies are very small and will stay hidden in the huge area, and some of the enemies will wander away and can be a nightmare to find. It is super frustrating to have one enemy remaining and you just can't find it. Another problem I have with the game is sprinting. On most survivors, using an attack causes you to stop sprinting, so to play optimally and increase your odds of dodging attacks, you must tap the sprint key after every single attack. This is stupid as hell. It honestly hurts my hands to do if I play more than a few runs at a time. All that needs to be done is adding an option to make sprinting a toggle so that you sprint instantly after you finish using your attack. Thankfully, there is a mod that does exactly that, and honestly, I can't play without it anymore. The final issue I have with the game is how death works in multiplayer. If you die, you aren't revived until your team makes it to the next stage, which means you can't obtain items for that entire stage, which causes you to fall behind compared to your teammates and the difficulty scaling. This then makes it easier for you to die again on the next stage, which can result in a vicious cycle of feeling like you can't do anything, even if your teammates are still strong enough to keep winning. This could be fixed by allowing your teammates to revive you at your dead body. There could even be a timer you had to wait before you were able to be revived, so that there's still a punishment for dying, but it would be less extreme than the current system. Overall, Risk of Rain is one of the best roguelikes I have ever played. I still love hopping in for a run or two after over 100 hours of gameplay, and there is enough content in the game to keep me occupied for another 100 plus hours if I try to complete the Eclipse game mode. There are just a few major flaws holding it back from being what I would consider a masterpiece. I would highly recommend Risk of Rain. Even if roguelikes aren't typically your thing, the difficulty options make it approachable and very much so worth your time.